Okay, we'll get started now. To start this meeting, I would first like to acknowledge that while we are speaking virtually, many of us are in Ottawa on unceded Anishinaabe territory. It's essential that we remember we are settlers on Turtle Island and that what we do and say today echoes back through generations who have lived on this land. I'd also like to start by thanking our partner organization for this event, Youth Action Now. Their group has supported dozens of projects designed and led by young people in Ottawa, and they are our fellow incubees at the Social Planning Council of Ottawa. Our featured panelists tonight have both received grants from Youth Action Now in the past and are doing excellent work in Ottawa. We have Serisha Iyar, the founder and executive director of Leading in Color, and Marina Touré, the VP of Community Engagement at U Ottawa's Black Student Leaders Association. So a little bit of housekeeping. Please know that we're expecting this panel discussion to be done at 7 p.m. with the last half hour meant for Q&A. If you have a question, please put it in the chat at any time. I will queue them up for that segment at the end, and we'll open the floor to audio questions at the very end after all the written ones are done. With that, I'd like to give both of our panelists the opportunity to introduce yourselves to the audience. So starting with Marina, please tell us who you are, the group you represent, and what your mission is.
Great. So hello everyone. My name is Marina. I'm a third year student at the University of Ottawa in the Political Science and Juris Doctor program, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement Franco at the Black Student Leader Association. At the BSLA, we try to assist the student in every part of the student journey. So whereas that be the social, the academic, or the philanthropist aspect of that life, our mission is also to highlight Black voices and to make sure that we are heard and that our community have a safe space to come to. So yeah, that's who I am.
Excellent, thank you. And Serisha.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Serisha. I'm the founder and executive director of Leading in Color, which is a grassroots organization, technically speaking, based in Ottawa. That's where I am, out in Orleans. But we operate across Canada. And what we do is basically train racialized youth in activism. So this includes skills development, workshops, through events. We have a variety of programming that's dedicated specifically to racialized youth, and specifically Black, Indigenous, and youth of color overall in terms of our audience. We've been around for just over a year now. We started last July, and it's just myself, and then I have a team of 4 or 5 advisors that help me make some decisions with a good sort of consultation approach. And I'm excited to talk to you all. The grant that we received, I believe, was in January. It seems like forever ago. And it was where we had the opportunity to spotlight some grassroots activism that was happening specifically from Black Muslim women in Ottawa. And so the Herongate Coalition and their legal clinic that was built out of that were our features for an Activision panel, is what we called it. And so that was our project with Youth Action Now. And I think that's about it. I use she, her pronouns. That's in my little name tag, but yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, well, on she, her, actually, you're both here not only as young city makers, but also as women of color. I think that most people in the room here tonight have gained at least some understanding of diversity and the value of diversity, but it's often framed in the very corporate phrase of diversity and inclusion. What I'm less sure that everyone will have a full understanding and appreciation of is intersectionality and what that means for groups and organizations who are trying to build community among their people. So I was wondering if you could both speak a bit about how your understanding of intersectionality shapes your work. Serisha, would you lead off?
Sure, yeah. I'm happy to. It might make sense for Marina to jump in at some point. Please feel free, because intersectionality is about Black women, and that's how it was started. It was created by Kimberly Crenshaw in her work in, I think it was '89, on the intersection of sex and gender pertaining to legal cases. And so basically what she did, intersectionality is an analytical framework that she created, wherein she examined legal cases of sexism and noticed the trend of all cases of sexism being around white women, or vice versa in that concept. And then cases of racism being implicated for Black men, which then ignored the experience of Black women. And so intersectionality is a framework that we use, an analytical framework that we use to ensure that Black women in particular are being supported, uplifted, and leading a lot of the work that we do. And so things that we do in practice for that include, not just specific to Black women, but to all the people of color that work within our organization, is that we don't have any volunteers. We specifically raise funds to pay people. So anybody who does any work for us is fully paid at a livable wage for whatever contract work they're able to do. The analytical framework that we use to build resources and to create any sort of policy discussions and informed policy discussions that we have with the federal government or other folks who approach us for our perspective is a framework that we continue to use. And I'm very privileged in being able to do that. One is somebody who's a woman of color, but not a Black woman, but of African heritage. And so there's a lot of complexity there. But basically what we do is take that framework and apply it to our everyday work in order to have a truly intersectional lens to the work that we do with young people. And I'll leave it there and maybe jump in afterwards if Marina has anything else to say.
No, Serisha, you touched on really great point and you gave a really nice explanation. I think what I would just like to add is that for me, intersectionality is also making sure that we understand that we do have multiple identities and to make sure that we get educated on each aspect of those identities. In our work in BSLA, we definitely try to cater to all the different identities, such as making events that are combining both interests, for example, having a panel on what it is being Black and queer, for example, or what is being the Black woman in the workplace, or different events that can combine those different identities that people have, and just to make sure that we show the community that we understand, that we try to get educated on those different topics, and that intersectionality should be normalized, that it is a thing, that we have different identities, that we're not only like just Black, we're also women, we're also women of color, and we're students, and we're bilingual. We have all those different identities that come in when we do the work. So it's definitely just making sure that we understand that we're educating on that, and that we're able to create a safe space when everything and those entities can collab and just interact with each other. Yeah, that's pretty much that.
No, that's excellent. Serisha, there was something you mentioned in that I find really interesting, not least of which because it's something that Synapcity is going through right now. This idea that in order to create a safe space for everyone, volunteerism can actually be a barrier in itself. I was wondering if you could tell us more about that, because it is something that we're personally grappling with today.
Yeah, so basically when I started this, I made the decision that I didn't want to bring on folks as volunteers, specifically because the people that I'm working for and with are all racialized youth. And I felt that so many times in my life has my labor been exploited for whatever benefit, for the expertise in my employment, in my activism. And I didn't want to do that to other people. And so I committed to being able to fundraise as a grassroots organization, which is very difficult because we don't have any we purposefully don't have status as a charity based on the work that we do. And so very reliant on community sort of mutual aid funds and grants like Youth Action Now to do the work that we're doing. And so through having like panels and for example, with the Youth Action Now grant, we were able to not only pay for a space in Ottawa to hold the event, but also to pay an honorarium for the speakers so that we're compensating them for their time, their energy, their expertise, their lived experience. And then everything else that we do, I take on personally because I don't feel that it's fair to ask people to volunteer and do these sorts of things. I think it's very exhausting work to have to constantly uplift your own communities and defend your communities and take charge in this activism. And there's plenty of work being done unpaid already. So trying to move away from the structure of volunteering as sort of like civic duty and moving more towards volunteering as allyship is what I see. So for example, if we're hosting an event and we had an organization that, for example, was mostly dominated by white folks who then offered us a space to have an event or something like that as a volunteer sort of piece. That would be something that I would accept, but taking the labor of racialized youth for the benefit of the work that we're doing, I just don't think makes sense when what we're trying to do is build capacity within our communities and build knowledge sharing and education and structure ourselves in a way that is supportive as opposed to like labor extractive. So yeah, so that's kind of my stance. That's not to say that nobody should volunteer anywhere by any means, but it's very specific to the labor that I'm putting in and that my organization is doing is very intense and can be quite triggering as well for a lot of people. So wanting to respect the boundaries that other people have and paying them for their time is the most beneficial way I can do that and the most equitable way I can do that.
Yeah, it's work that deserves to be paid and people that deserve to be paid. I love that. So my next question is, Synapcity is most commonly working in the city as a facilitator of conversations. And a key part of that work is knowing how to create a safer space. We've recently had to relearn how to do that again this year, this time how we can do it digitally over a place like Zoom. I know both of your organizations also create safe spaces for conversations, and Serisha in particular, you have the Digital Institute for Activism online. So that is another one where you've had experience there. So I'm wondering, what do you think are the most important things to do when creating safe environments, and how is it different in person and online?
Yeah, are you asking me first, or Marina, do you want to have a chance to speak?
Either or, free for all.
I don't know. You can start. I can start.
Yeah, go for it. Go ahead.
Sure. I guess for us, what we do as BSLA is that we have bi-weekly discussions. We call them Black Chat, and we discuss different themes related to various topics that are happening right now, or that are something that we do share with our community. And I guess when we moved online, we tried to enforce what we did just in person. So that means making sure that we do a land acknowledgement, to make sure that we say that every opinion is welcome, but that we have to stay respectful, that also things that people would say are going to be triggering, that we're trying to really have a healing process so that it's okay if they feel overwhelmed or if they just want to step out or take a breather, because it is the type of discussion that we're having. So definitely it's just making sure that we explain this beforehand, laying just all the ground rules, and also making sure that everybody is heard, that we're giving everyone a chance to speak. Most of the time when we do have these discussions, we like to call out people. We always ask everybody if they have an opinion, if they have something to add. I think it's really important to just make sure that we are a community, not just only on the surface, but in the work that we're doing. So just giving a space for everybody. I think that's how we try to make sure that we have a safe space at BSLA.
And Serisha?
Yeah, so there's a couple key skills I think that we use. And so for me personally, again, I'm doing a lot of the on the ground work myself. And I have quite extensive training in active listening and crisis intervention. And so that comes quite in handy when we're having discussions with folks and when things can be more triggering. We also have safety precautions in place. So for example, we know because we're a group of people who are racialized and who host events largely for racialized youth, but open it up to the broader public, that we're often targeted, or that people will comment racist things or hack into our events and things like that. And we're prepared for that and prepared to deal with that. And that comes again from just my experience having done this work for a long time, or what seems to be a long time. I guess I'm only 25, but what feels like a long time, and just gaining those skills. And then from our Digital Institute for Activism, which is basically, it's the name that we have for our online training program, where we customize activist training for racialized youth. In those places, in terms of facilitation, I like to do like temp checks and make sure what people are bringing into the space. So for example, I was leading an event the other day with folks from Hamilton, and the same day was when the defund the HPS, or the Hamilton Police Services protests had been raided. And so the people who were there were feeling quite heavy, and so making sure to check in with them, bringing sort of an adaptability skill set to that, so that when people are feeling a certain way, you can adjust the way that you're facilitating and adjust the way you have conversations, has been helpful. And then I also like to do just check-ins throughout the time that we facilitate discussions, to make sure people are feeling okay, and let them know that like silence is okay if things need to be quiet for a while, if people need to turn off their cameras, if they need to leave a breakout room, for example. So just like real facilitation sort of 101 skills, and trying to implement those consistently online in everything that we do. And yeah, and then the rest of it is really, I guess, just from my own background and expertise in trying to implement the skill set that I have to make everything a little bit safer. Again, that's not always what's going to happen, because like we can't really make the safest space in reality, but making it as safe as we can is really the goal.
Yeah. So here's a thought. So one thing that I've already caught that I didn't do for this session, and that I've seen as a best practice, is using pronouns. I haven't put he, him in mine. But I was wondering, as an exercise, looking at this session, what could be improved to have made this a safer space? Is there any other things like pronouns that you saw that were missed that you've seen as a best practice?
Sure. I guess it's not like we have a smaller group, and so that's also a little bit more intimate, which changes the way that you structure things, right? The pronouns, I think, is usually a common one. I know there's a lot of back and forth between whether or not doing land acknowledgements are relevant on Zoom calls. What I like to do specifically is that when I'm leading an event, I talk about my connection to the land, which is very specific because my family came here as refugees from South Africa, and South Africa's apartheid system that they tried to escape from was effectively built by Canada. And so I have a very unique solidarity with Indigenous peoples here, and a feeling of obligation. And so that's usually how I do quote unquote a land acknowledgement, I guess, is identifying that as being something that I'm bringing into the space. And so I find that helpful. Again, like the temp check-ins to see how folks are feeling, especially during COVID, and when things might be difficult for some people and maybe not for others, recognizing those sort of differences. But yeah, I guess it's also up to like whatever group you have, right? So like I work with racialized youth who offer and provide a different sort of space than other groups might have different needs. So yeah, that's what I'll offer.
Oh, perfect. And Marina, any other best practices for this session or for others?
I think for most part, you're just a really good host and you have a really good tone. I think it's also really important to make sure that you establish some kind of a connection with your group. And it is what you're doing, just looking into the camera, smiling, just making sure that you nod along when people talk. I think just making sure to show that you're listening and that they are heard. That's definitely what I try to do most, and just giving off the energy that you're happy, you're in a good mood. I know that sometimes when you do talk about heavy topics, just smiling along, or just trying to making sure that you're giving some kind of a support, even if it's online. something that you can establish regardless of your group and the group that you cater to. But yeah.
Perfect. So now this is intended to be a youth showcase, and I think that despite being over Youth Action Now's age limit, I can still consider myself a youth as well. We've already talked about some of the differences in attitudes, on volunteerism and between generations of community organizers, but I know that there's plenty more. I was wondering if you could tell us about any experience you've had where your perspective as a youth has either conflicted with or successfully changed another organization or another body. It's a harder one, so if you have an idea, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I can start. Unless do you want to go first, Marina?
No, you're good to go.
Okay. Yeah, so I can give you quite a local example in Ottawa, and hopefully they don't mind me shouting them out, but I think they'll like that. So I last year, almost 2 years ago now, was the refugee rights policy intern for Citizens for Public Justice, which is an Ottawa-based advocacy organization that is like a faith-based, a Christian-based organization, but does progressive policy work in anti-poverty, in refugee rights, and in climate justice. And I was there as an intern, and one of the only racialized people in the office, in fact, probably the only one, and one of the only ones in the organization. And I have felt like it wasn't much that I did, but come to realize recently, like, it was such a huge impact. I brought an intersectional lens and did a lot of research on intersectionality, in particular to refugee rights there. I started 3 podcasts for them. They had this idea of like, they wanted to start a podcast and nobody had taken it up. And so I was just like, let me get my phone and record a conversation between me and the other former intern who was there, and develop this podcast called The Intern Exchange that's been handed off to each subsequent intern. And so that was pretty cool. And a lot of the work that I've done, I've been told has transformed the organization and the way that it operates, and looking at anti-oppression and looking at involving young people, and in particular coming from a faith community that is quite rampant with like white supremacy and every sort of systemic oppression you can think of, and being able to transform our approaches to things. Not that that was their approach at all before, but like create a more intersectional lens, a more anti-oppressive lens in the work that we were doing. And they really listened to me. And I think that was the biggest thing. I've been in spaces as a young person where people have just tokenized me, and like their whole goal is to just say like, we have a young person here, not validate any of my experience, not validate my expertise. And that was not the experience I had at CPJ. They very much validated everything and put me as the expert on certain things. And I think that led to that transformative change. So I think it's definitely possible. People just need to really commit to it and uphold that commitment continuously. So for example, I've continued to be involved. Like I just met with the board the other day, and I've done consulting work for them since I left. And so it's not just about, I guess to speak in sort of capitalist terms, it's like the investment that you put into young people, not necessarily financially, but the amount of energy and listening and learning that you do from young people can be transformative for an organization in that way. And so that was a good experience for me.
Excellent. And I love that, the initiative that you were given the mandate to do has outlasted you and has really, lifted that organization higher. I think that's what we all want to see. So that's excellent. And Marina, anything on this one?
Yes. So when I was thinking about the question, it was really interesting because in BSLA, we are around pretty much the same age. But what came into my mind is that I'm an international student. So when I arrived here, I had to, I guess, relearn what it meant to be Black in a North American point of view, in the Canadian society. So it was also for me to just sit and listen to the experience that my friends have lived. And definitely with that, what I was able to just put in place is having a discussion that's centered definitely around the live experience of international students coming here, or just making sure that we have this type of dialogue between I guess Black student living in here as a diaspora or just international student coming here. Um, Definitely on the youth perspective, our school still have a lot to learn, I guess. But definitely just seeing how organization View Section now just validate her voices, provide us with grants, just being able to speak on panels such as the one tonight, or just being invited to different panels, having other organizations reach out to us, just showed that we as youth, as like racial as youth, are heard and understood. So definitely, I guess that's how I see the change for me. Just still having that support from the community behind us, just helping us, pushing us, especially when you're young. I think it's really important to just be sure that you have that small pat on the shoulder. But yeah, I guess that's
Yeah.
that.
Well, I think definitely the interaction between a university and its student body is a source of conflict. And I know here in Ottawa right now, we have a sit-in in progress. And so, I want to thank you both for just being here. But yeah, I think a pretty clear example of an ongoing relationship between youth and an institution, and an ongoing challenge to really try and shift an old body to a new worldview. So it's a hard fight and an uphill one, but yeah, really good to see. I actually think that leads into something that I didn't prep you guys on as a question, so I'm just going to jump into it. And it's again what I think is partially a difference in language, but also something that pulls on deeper threads. And it's the difference between what I think Synapcity and a lot of other organizations would call citizenship skills, and what I think both of you would call activism skills. And I think that there is a few different pieces to that. I was wondering if you guys could give your own definitions of them and talk about how you think those both fit in to your work.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that we actually had a conversation about at CPJ too, like the idea of citizens for public justice, right? And there's it's kind of twofold, because when we think of citizenship, we think of civic duty, and this idea that we have a responsibility to our cities, we have a responsibility to the places that we call home, in a way that requires engaging with our systems, right? So like our governance systems, whether that's volunteering, whether that's voting, whatever the case, usually that's what it is. It's getting involved with decision makers, and activism is a little bit different than that. And so I think there's activism done by citizens, like people who legitimately have citizenship status in Canada, but that language is very polarizing and can also be racist sometimes, right? Because citizenship isn't necessarily required for you to do activism. Citizenship isn't required for you to feel obligated to give back, and that's something that is often pushed onto to immigrants and to refugees, that we like have a duty to give back to this country that has taken us in, when more often than not this country is the one who displaced us in the first place, and now wants us to repay our debt to them, and that's not what citizenship means in the way that people talk about civic duty. And so I think that's where a little bit of the clash is. And then activism, I would say, is a whole other concept for me. And so activism, I think the skill sets can be cross-functional, but activism is really about seeking justice, and that doesn't necessarily happen within the system of civic duty. That can be outside of the system. It could be quite frankly like trying to burn down the system, or trying to work within the system, dependent on what your strategies are and what your political values and social values are. So I would say that those are the two big differences in them, and that language of citizenship can kind of be a difficult thing to process when we're not discussing like, I am a Canadian citizen and I have a passport. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, definitely. You just said so many stuff that just woof. But definitely, I think what's really important is when we think about citizenship, we don't really associate with fighting for social justice or just making sure things are right. And definitely, when we also think of citizenship, we don't really realize that we view citizenship as it has been taught to us by a racist system, and one that is still not recognizing the fact that it is racist, that there is systemic racism, and that definitely that is how we view citizenship. Whereas when we talk about activism, it's definitely I would not say the opposite, but definitely the realization that we need to fight for those issues, that we need to make sure that we create a new system, one that's able to just make sure that every Canadian citizen has equal rights, is not discriminated against. And definitely, when I think of activism, that's how I see it. And I think for me, for citizenship to really work, it also requires a lot of unlearning, and definitely just realizing that the way we view citizenship has to change, and we need to discuss a new way to be a citizen. And definitely, if we can really have those discussions about what citizenship is, we can have it evolved and have maybe another a new vision of what citizenship is, and that can like go well with activism.
Yeah. Well, if you'd like to be a part of forming that new vision for citizenship, please join Synapcity and all of our future events. That is excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I love the idea that, you know, citizenship, even active citizenship, is an obligation to work with the system, even if it is conflicting with one power that be. It's not conflicting with the entire system. It's negotiating with it. And activism doesn't demand fighting the system, but it leads you in that direction. And I think what's interesting to me, and I don't know if you've felt the same, is that, you know, through school and the we days and things like that, there was a big focus on active citizenship and a very participatory approach to things. Whereas now many of the people I grew up with, despite getting those messages of citizenship as the virtue, identify as activist. And that is the label that they would pin themselves with first. And do you think that there is a generational aspect there? Because activism isn't new by any stretch, but there is, I think, a vocabulary shift with what, you know, an active 27-year-old would call themselves now versus, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's a generational divide that is racial, is what I would say it is. Like that intersection of being an elder who's racialized and looking at activism now in terms of young racialized people looks very different than like what Canadians would be, or white Canadians would be used to. And I'm very glad you brought up the We Day thing, because I think that we don't need to jump into their whole drama. But that's a really good example, right? Of like a lot of volunteerism, quote unquote activism that was founded by two white men who were then eliciting a lot of white children and then eventually like a lot of immigrant children in particular, with this idea of giving back. But giving back to what, giving back to whom, and giving back how. And that's where all of the problems sort of lie, right? And so that to me, for example, wasn't activism. Like doing like the cheer events at the Canadian Tire Center or whatever it was that they did isn't activism to me. Whereas like what's happening right now with, and I'm sure Marina can talk more to this, with the folks who are doing the sit-in right now is like very clear to me activism. Like they're very clearly seeking justice for something that is based on the systems, that is a form of systemic oppression, anti-Black racism within New Ottawa, and within every single facet of U Ottawa. And the fact that they have to do that is so ridiculous. But the fact that it's happening is like a far better example for me of what about what activism looks like versus what this sort of conceptualization of having a duty to like the citizenry or whatever we call it. Yeah, I think that's just like the very stark difference that exists between the two.
Yeah.
No, yeah, definitely. I agree 100% with Serisha. I think what we do tend to forget is that 20 years ago, when immigrant came to Canada, or even when they arrived, their first thought was to conform. And definitely, when you do try to conform with the society, your first thing isn't really to fight against social injustice. You see it, you live it, but you also have other stuff to do. You have to provide for our children. You have to make sure that you're able to put things in their plate. So definitely when we do think about activism 20 or 30 years ago, that's also the reality that we have to understand. Whereas as when you see now, especially with the sit-ins or with the protest that occurred, I think it was last week on Laurier and Nicolas Street. When we think about activism now, it's definitely, yes, we are settlers here in Canada, but definitely we lived there for a while now, and we're just tired of reliving trauma. And we had those discussions with our parents. We tried to talk with them, and right now we're just trying to make a real change. And I think that's what activism, like real activism, is right now in our times. Definitely, yeah.
Excellent.
And Marina actually just reminded me of something too, is that this idea of like so like older racialized folks in activism in particular in Canada is so different because of immigration status, right? And so for all the reasons that she stated. But then when we look even further than that, perhaps like if you've been here for a generation or two, so I'm first generation, my parents came here, and the activism that like my dad was a freedom fighter against the apartheid system is probably even more radical than anything I've ever done here, right? And so looking at those differences too, and that has a lot to do with like immigration status, economic migrants versus folks who are quite literally fleeing countries, and then those who were legally allowed to be here as immigrants from different countries way longer than some of us, right? Like some of us were not allowed to immigrate here until the 80s. Black folks, I think in particular, were not allowed to immigrate here until late 70s, early 80s sort of thing. Same with South Asians. And so there's a lot of that history that also needs to be considered in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd be remiss if the only thing I can think to add at this point is that I know it is still an active political struggle for new Canadians, right? Between economic migrants and people who are coming in with, conservative perspectives by nature, but also, as you're describing, very strong socialized perspectives in other subcultures coming into Canada. So I think that's a fascinating evolution and a constant injection of new thought into the ecosystem. So that's excellent. I wanted to come back to the groups you represent. This is meant to be a showcase after all, and both Leading in Color and the Black Student Leaders Association are doing great work. We've got an audience here with other community organizers. We've got a couple of city staff in the room. We've got some of the Synapcity board and just lovely citizens of Ottawa. So I wanted to give you each 5 minutes or whatever you can use. The floor is yours. What is it you're working on today? And how can we all help raise you guys higher? And Marina, if you could start.
Yes. Yeah, I think I can start. We did touch on it a little bit, but right now there is sit-in that is happening at the university. Students have been there for I think more than 100 hours now. Still no contact with central administration. And I think right now the most important is to make sure that we are circulating this. There's campaigns that people can take part in online. We can send emails. There's also recurring donations to the food bank that are also taking part. Definitely, if you can, you're definitely welcome to come and sit with the different students at Tabaret. But there's also a lot of different ways that you can help online. Um, I think right now the really important part is to make sure that we do have this conversation with central administration at the university, and just that we do have the concrete changes in response to our demands. And so that's what we're currently working on right now at the university. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, for that campaign, would love any additional links. And then you mentioned financial support. Is the food bank the best place to support, to donate support? Or is there another organization that we should be looking for to let people know about financial support?
Yes. So right now we received a lot of food and support, and we were thinking about another way to give back to the community. So what we're doing is that we're taking donations of like non-perishable food items at the university. So we can definitely drop us that, and then we'll give it back to the food bank. I'll also drop the Instagram in the chat so folks can go around and look at it. There's all the campaigns and all the information on why we're sitting there and why we're waiting. But yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And Serisha, what's Leading in Color up to that we can help with?
Yeah, so we actually have a lot going on right now. I think the biggest one to start off with is a few days ago. So on Friday, I launched this winter support fund for racialized youth, and it's literally a mutual aid network that we're facilitating. So for those of you who aren't familiar, basically mutual aid is where we redistribute wealth, right? So if you have money, you give money. If you don't have money and you need it, you take it. And so we're facilitating that, and we on Friday raised $1,000 that we're able to redistribute to about 12 young people who are in need. And then over the weekend, and I'm just looking at the form right now, we now have, from those 12, we're up to 68 people who have requested funds, which is a lot. And we're doing that over the course of December. But we're fundraising specifically for that. We don't need any money for the organization personally. We've been very blessed, I guess, in the past few months to have received quite a bit of grant funding, but those grants can't be used for this particular work. And so it's a mutual aid fund. I will post the links in the chat. And basically, if you have the means to donate, please do so. You can donate on our website, or the quickest ways are through PayPal or e-transfer that's listed in the form. And what we're going to do is literally redistribute it to folks who are in need. And it's less about charity and more about solidarity. So this isn't like, please donate money to us, like we were poor and need it, right? Like it's not that. It's that people are struggling because of COVID, and there are folks who have plenty and there are folks who don't. And we want to equal that out a little bit. So that would be the biggest one. And the thing I will say is that you'll notice that it's across Canada, but the overwhelming majority of people are from Ottawa. They have 613 area code numbers. And so people in our community are affected. And that's important to note. The other things we have coming up are in 2 days, actually, on International Day for Human Rights. We have a event on carceral abolition. So looking at what abolition looks like from the lens of child welfare. And so the person who will be speaking is somebody who has had lived experience being incarcerated and also in the child welfare system. And they're a young racialized person. And then we also have an event upcoming called Diaspora Dialogues, which is where we talk about diasporic activism that's happening. And it's actually being featured by a local activist, Sherry Wong from Ottawa. And she's going to be discussing Hong Kong's anti-extradition law amendment bill movement and how she's been mobilizing her community in Ottawa and in Canada. And then lastly, we have a podcast you can check out that has some local Ottawa folks on it. And we're recruiting people for a fellowship that's a paid opportunity with $1,000 micro grant for them to do their own projects. So there's a lot going on. You can check us out at leadingincolor.ca. But again, I think the biggest need right now is that winter support fund, and the events you're welcome to attend. They're free and they're open to everybody. So please do check those out, and I'll just drop the form link now.
Fantastic. Please do. Those are all excellent. And yet another shift in vocabulary that I caught there, you know, the difference between solidarity and mutual aid funds as opposed to charity and philanthropy. I think it's yet another one. Maybe I'm just getting into the weeds with it, but I just love how really it is. It's a small shift, but at the same time, it's a pretty fundamental one. And so really interesting to hear it and see it in action. And, you know, thank you both for attending. Round of applause for everything you're doing and for everything you've shared with us here today. So with that, I've seen a couple people message me about questions, so I think we'll just open it up for that. Ken Victor, would you like to jump off mute and jump into the chat?
There are so many questions swirling in my head. I'm almost like, okay, which one should I ask? But I think I want to go to the one that came up sort of last. It was really interesting to hear the conversation of activism and citizenship. And so I'm wondering, you know, there's sort of this metaphor floating around in Synapcity called municipal citizens, you know, like what does it mean to show up as a citizen of your municipality sort of thing. But I'm really interested in what you think. So it sounds like there's a difference in terms of the lens you look through in activism versus being a citizen. There's a different set of assumptions that you make. I'm actually wondering if there's a different set of capabilities. And I know, Serisha, since you work with actually building capability in activism, I'm wondering if you think there are some capabilities that get built in activism, which really aren't, which are core to activism, but not to being an engaged citizen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll start with the fact that I think citizenship and this idea of being good citizens, of having civic duty and being responsible is inherently one that's very, very privileged, right? So I can go out there perhaps and say, I was born and raised here, I'm a citizen, and so I have the right to occupy Nicholas Street and you can't say anything about it. And that might be something that I can do that other people don't. But at the same time, it's also, I can't see you, so I don't know who you look like. So I'll use Nick as an example. Nick, for example, if assuming that your parents were also born in Canada, mine were not. And so I can, and so there's this thing, for example, that they call like double punishment. So say, for example, one of my parents did something very, very terrible. Doesn't matter that they're a Canadian citizen now. If they get stripped of their citizenship, the Canadian government, according to law, can also strip me of my citizenship in spite of the fact that I was born and raised here. And so that's something that my white counterparts, or Nick, for example, wouldn't have to deal with, right? And so the level of privilege in the way that we build capacity around activism is reliant on that. And so I think that when we're talking about framing sort of skills development in that area, using the privilege of like legal status citizenship to be good, quote unquote, citizens is the best sort of messaging I can see around that. And then anything that relates to sort of building capacity and skill set comes from the added benefit of lived experience without that privilege. And so that's something that can be taught to an extent, like taught how to be a good ally, how to do active allyship. And that's something that we saw at the Nicholas and Laurier occupation, was like white folks who were quite literally putting their bodies, young white folks who were putting their bodies in front of racialized folks between them and the cops so that the cops would not hurt them because they knew they'd be fined. And so that's something that we can teach. But then the sort of inherent knowledge and inherent learning is something that I think that's where like expertise comes in, and we learn about how different people have different expertise and whether or not that expertise as lived experience is valuable in activist spaces and in skills building or not. And so I think that's where the difference lies. But yeah, I think that's my answer.
Thanks.
Marina, do you have anything on that one?
No, I think Serisha pretty much said everything. Yeah.
Awesome. I think the only thing I can think to add is that, at least when I hear it discussed, citizenship, like you said, starts from that privilege, whereas activism almost uses struggle as a source of energy. There is a sense that that is the friction that actually starts the engine, as opposed to running downhill with a project. And I think that's really interesting. Haven't seen any other questions yet. If anyone else would like to throw a question out there, including our panelists, would love to do that first. And if not, we'll go back to Ken because I heard he's got 50. Oh, Ian, please jump on.
Thanks so much, Nick. And I apologize, I'm gonna keep my video off. I've got terrible lighting here, so I don't want to blind you with the glare. But thank you very much for the event, for sharing the wisdom here. So I run a charity, and I'm curious, like, I feel like, Marina, when you're talking, I feel that, right? Like I have skepticism about the limits of what charity can do. I have deep skepticism about the role of philanthropy in our society and the way it's operating, the way it gives back the smallest of portions of the left hand of what it takes with the right in huge portions, right? There's a fundamental inequity going on here. I'm curious, in terms of acts of solidarity on an organizational level, because you're each strongly involved in organizations, what can we do at an organization level to help out? And I guess this might come down to maybe more broadly, like, what are some of the biggest barriers you've been running into at an organizational level? You talked about a micro grant, or about, those who have giving those who need. And maybe I'm leading a bit, but I suspect that funding is always a challenge there too. So I'm curious about just hearing your thoughts about that, because I really think, just again, to put this in context, if we think about like the Assembly of the Seventh Generation, a lot of the work that was done there on the Truth and Reconciliation Strategy, I think it was the 54th, I might get the number wrong, but the idea is that we invest directly in youth-led grassroots organizations, and they turn around and give a whole bunch of money to a big charity, which I think is wrong. And so I'm curious about, what are some possibilities you see there? What's some advice you have for someone like myself who is finds himself somehow at the top of this charity and is trying to figure out how to mobilize in service of young grassroots initiatives? And thank you for listening to Ramble.
Marina,
Yes.
I turned on my video. There we go. See?
Oh, there you go. And thank you for that, Ian. And I think just to make sure I've captured the question for both of them, what barriers are you still hitting as an organization, and what can other organizations do to help?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I think what's really interesting in regards to BSLA is that we are university recognized organization, but we don't get any funding from the university. And because of that, we definitely have to look for funding outside of the university, which sometimes doesn't make really sense because we do cater to mostly research students on campus. So it should be I don't know, like implied that we should be able to get funding from university. We do pay tuition. So definitely when you think about that, you do sense some kind of a dilemma. But definitely funding has been, I guess, we've been really lucky to find some organizations that are able to provide for grants. Our student union also do grants and help association and organization on campus. We also do have some events that we make that we do sell tickets. For example, last year we had our Soulful Expression. It's some kind of a big talent show, and for that it is a free event, but you can give donations and you can help with that. I just see a follow-up question. I think for BSLA, we're able to get a grant from Youth Action Now. I don't quite remember the exact name, but I know it's to help to fund different events. So we do get grants like that. We also do get grants for example, we had to work on our website. So we did get a grant for that from our school. So we do get grants and funding, but I think the struggle come from looking for the grants and also just wondering why we're not getting the help when we should be getting the help. But that's probably one of the struggles that we do encounter when we look for funding in BSLA.
Yeah, and Marina, before we go to Serisha on this, I wanted to follow up because you're in an interesting position and I've been in it before as well. Student organizations suffer from a constant turnover. And so I know most nonprofits suffer from constant turnover, but yours in particular, how do you build something that lasts when there is that constant turnover?
That's a really great point, and it's definitely true. I think we've been really lucky to be able to build our community with the students. BSLA has been around for like around 10 years, so we definitely have some great alumni, and social media also really helps just to make sure that the students know what we're doing, know that we're here. Also just having consistent events, because sometimes when you don't, you do tend to get forgotten by the student body. So definitely having the events. And also there is a need for organization like BSLA. So I think that's probably why we're able to just build a community. But yeah, it's definitely hard being a student organization out here, especially in those times. Online, it gets harder, I guess, to just maintain the community. And we're lucky in that sense. But I know for my other friends that are in other organization, it can get pretty tough. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So Serisha, back on Ian's question.
Yeah, so I have a couple answers to them. So the first around barriers, funding for sure is always a barrier. But right now, because I have not considerable, but have a decent amount of funding for the work that I'm doing, I'm noticing what other barriers are at play. And so, for example, funding that is enough for me to host an event, but not enough for me to ensure that all the needs of accessibility are being met. And so I think that's a place where larger organizations who are not necessarily grassroots, who have maybe have status, maybe have access to different opportunities, can come in. So for example, if I'm hosting an event and a nonprofit or a bigger organization has like ASL interpreters on their Rolodex and is able to fund that piece as a part of accessibility, then that's something that would create a better opportunity for our event to make it more accessible and reach out to a wider audience. And so that I think is a very core way, apart from funding, that people can support these initiatives and support this work, is rather than trying to fund everything, funding small pieces of it through their own sort of through their own organizations or through their own systems that they have built in, and having us benefit from those systems. The other thing would be platforming. So like every year, I feel like I see this exact same like 25 under 25 whatever magazine has put out for Canada, and I get very tired of seeing the same people over and over again. And so this is something that I try to do, is to not gatekeep opportunities. So if I've hired somebody to do one workshop, I won't hire them under the same grant, and I will try and mix up the folks that we have and do more outreach and collect more people, because there's so much expertise out there, but not everybody has the funds to like build a private website or like market themselves in a particular way. And so not wanting to gatekeep those few opportunities that already exist among the same few people. And I haven't been in Ottawa very long. I've only been here for about 2 years, but I already know who the like go-to racialized youth are in this city. And I don't want to be one of those go-to people, but I want to help expand that base in a way. And so I think that is kind of one of the biggest barriers. The other thing I was going to note about philanthropy is, so I've been in nonprofit now as my full-time sort of paid gigs. I've been in nonprofit for 4 years now, and or 5 years across 4 different organizations in Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto. And philanthropy is like the biggest scam I've ever seen in my life. It's just like, philanthropy is not solidarity. It is about like I've worked with like some of the biggest, richest people in this country, and it's about a tax credit and it's about receipts and that's it. And so that's why so many people don't give to grassroots organizations, right? And so that's a huge part of the problem, because when we want to collect money, everything is like friends of friends and really mutual aid. And some of us joke that we have like $200 that we split between us every month to try and like circulate it. So one month this person hosts, the next person this does something. And so that's another barrier, I would say, related to that. And then in terms of the types of grants that we're getting access to, so Youth Action Now was either our first or second. I think it was our second grant that we had ever gotten. The grants that I have now have quite literally just been very privileged opportunities that I've had. So because of the work that I do, like my paid job, and because of the previous paid work that I've done, because of my education connections, I've been able to gain access to specific programs and summits and conferences and things. And then they've had like grants attached to those. And because I was a member of whatever that event was, I was able to apply and receive grants. And then there's also been like organizational grants. So we have a micro grant from Equitas in Montreal. I also received a micro grant from Girls Action Foundation in Montreal. And then the biggest one we got, or not the biggest number, but the most expansive to do anti-racism work actually was from an American organization that's based in the UK. And so it's an international grant, and I qualified better for that than I did with any of the other ones that I applied to in Canada, let alone within Ottawa. And so I think that's not to like continuously plug Youth Action now. I just really appreciate what they did. But that was really helpful for us. And so that kind of alleviated a barrier. It was a super simple form. It didn't require a lot of extra stress. And then because I'm like a one-person show and have an advisory council as opposed to like volunteers doing labor, people don't want to give me money because of that, because they're like, you're going to run away with it, even though the point of the advisory council is to like have access to all of this and be hold me accountable. It's sketchy for some people because they like want to see a return on their investment, right? And I think we need to move away from that ideology. And so partnering with organizations or being platformed by other organizations is something that is really beneficial to mediate that. And yeah, I think I've been speaking for a long time now. So
That's an excellent answer. Both of those were very insightful and gave me some food for thought. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, coming from this, like I'm a little skeptical. Actually, I'm glad to hear that the microgrants work, but I think they don't go anywhere near far enough personally. Like I think the fact that, like you say, like $1,000 in the end actually isn't much money, right? When it comes to having these groups, like if you want to have, for example, an interpreter for an event, you're looking at anywhere from $600 to $1,000 there alone. So they, I think they need to be big, but I'm constantly curious. If I look at this, like what are some of the barriers? I've been privileged to work with many remarkable young people who have their initiatives that they're leading, and like yourself, Serisha, they're sometimes one-person shows, right? Kind of leading it through. There's not natural life cycle where you can only do it on a volunteer basis for so long. And I guess I'm curious, like I'm trying to figure like how I can start advocating better to the powers that be, but we need something more than what is happening in the charitable philanthropic nonprofit circle. There's just not enough funding going into it at all. And I think we not you, Marina and Serisha, but we as a society, if we really have some outcomes, we have to start doing some hard thinking about how we're freeing up the resources so that, for example, you don't have to volunteer and work a full-time job and go to school. I think when we look at the labor that you're doing and what you're contributing in so many different ways and forms, tonight being, not the least of that, and appreciated, we have to recognize that and find just, I don't know, the universal basic income. Like these are the things that we have to, as a sector, start talking and advocating more for, because I hear these and I'm not going to lie, I hear you being grateful for a $1,000 grant. And I think that's a terrible outcome because you should be asking for so much more, right? Like that's just where my headspace is at. And yeah, we'll I had a talk with Nick yesterday, and he knows that this is been something I've been wrestling with for a while.
It was top of mind on my question list for a reason, Ian. I want to make sure to show you out as well. Youth Ottawa is another phenomenal group in the city. I was on the board there as a teenager, and doing great work both in the civic education and engagement space, but also training young activists and starting to do the work there. So
we have miles. I'm gonna be honest, we have miles to go. Like you start this thing, okay, we got these concepts, here we go, and you try, and you're like, nope, it's going to require a lot more than we initially thought. So I appreciate that, Nick, but I also want to be pretty transparent. We have some work to do as well.
Of course. So David from the Sandy Hill CHC, I saw you had a question as well.
Yeah, no, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
I've been having so many problems with my microphone lately. I don't trust it, but here I am. Yeah, I wanted to, just to quickly to Ian's point as well. I had another question, but it was kind of negative, I think. So I kind of switched it up for something more positive. But, to go to Ian's point about this idea of funding, of course, important. But I think there's also this idea of efficiency. And one of the great advantages of young people is their savviness with technology. And just, what we used to do was, the old fashioned way, if you want to call it that, took hours and, people power and all this sort of brute force. And now, someone can send a tweet or something and it can go around the world, right? So I do get the point that funding is a challenge, but I also feel like that to me, that always helps me to remind myself not to be cynical about that, because young people are the people that are not only using the technologies and embracing them, they're often the ones that are inventing the next technology. So, we haven't seen it yet. So I know that those things are coming in some form. So anyway, sorry, stop rambling, but I'll get to my question. I guess, one of the sad facts is that the people in these power structures, regardless of they skew definitely to a gender and to an ethnicity, but let's just skip that for a second. Just they're typically people in more, it skews quite a bit older, 45, 50, 60 years old. And the organizations that you work with and your colleagues and other youth are obviously quite a bit younger. So I'm just wondering, what you would say to those people. You do speak to them in some, whether directly or indirectly, but how do you bridge that gap of understanding with the people that are 55 and 65 sitting in the boardrooms and in the politics and all that, and the experience that you're living and what you're talking about day to day, and there's a huge gap between that. So my question is, how do you sort of, if you
Oh, David, we did lose a little bit of your audio at the end. I don't know if we caught the full question, but connecting bridges between youth organizing and organizations led by seniors. Oh, okay, see you in the chat there. Yeah, love the question. Who wants to take it first?
I can go if you don't want to, or go ahead. Do you want? Okay. Yeah, so there's a couple things. I think first is that it's very hard to see past the sort of like ethnicity piece, right? Like it's so ingrained. And so like older racialized folks are super helpful. That's where my non-Ottawa grants have come from. Are people, particularly Black folks, who have seen my work and been like, this is what we need. Like our generation is tired, and we've given you the tools, we've given you the privileges, like as your parents, as your grandparents, brought you to spaces to have more privilege than we did, to use that privilege for something. And so connecting intergenerationally on that is something that's really important to our communities. And I think I won't speak for Indigenous folks, but I think this is something that Indigenous folks in Canada relate to as well, is that the activism that we do, the work that we do, the funding that we get is all intertwined with our elders. It's all influenced by our elders. It's not separated in any way for us, because our families are built differently. We look at family differently, and we look at activism and working for justice and connecting with people differently. And so when it comes to sort of the capitalist structures of being in a boardroom, for example, that might change somebody's politics, but it doesn't change necessarily the way in which our communities interact with one another when we're doing this work. And so that's sort of the biggest thing. Now, when it comes to, like, as a racialized young person reaching out to, say, older white folks who have positions of power and have money, that's actually where a lot of the racism comes in, is that people like don't trust me to handle money because of racist beings, or some people really trust me to have money because they're like, you're South Asian, you're good with money, or whatever, right? And so both those model minority and white supremacist values are implemented and implicated there. And so when we're trying to relate to folks, it's really about dismantling the systems and finding solidarity. And so that's where, like, CPJ is the example that I keep bringing up, because it quite frankly is a lot of older not conservative values, but like older Christians who are white, who are predominantly Dutch. And as somebody who's South African, the Dutch Reformed Church was not my first introduction to positive Christianity. But those folks have latched onto the work that I've done so inherently and with such passion and with such force, and have provided me the platforms and the spaces to lead work in a way that has just been unprecedented for anything else I've experienced. And I don't think I think they would say that I shouldn't be applauding them for that by any means, which I think is a testament to the work that they're doing. But that is the allyship that we need. Right. And so I'm not going to go reach out to like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and ask them for money. Like, I know they don't care about the work that I'm doing. But people who do care and who demonstrate solidarity are the folks that you can build bridges with, are the folks who you can bond with over shared struggle, over allyship, people who want to do good. Right. And so I think having that background is really, really important when doing this, because I, for example, would not reach out to every single person just because they had money, if their values are not aligned. And yeah, Marina.
No, I'm really glad to hear about Serisha experiences, because it's just it's giving me a bit more optimistic views. But definitely, I think your question touched on what's happening right now. We're having this non-dialogue with our central administration, who is probably a somewhat old folks that are in the central administration that do not want to listen to us, that do not want to communicate. The proof we have been sitting outside for like more than 3 days now and no contact. So definitely it is a reality. Sometimes we have to fight. We have to sit, we have to protest, we have to manifest. It is a reality. That's what we have to do. But definitely, as Serisha said really wisely, it's also to rely on our elders, to rely on those like Vasilos folk that are also in those spaces with the other members, to, I guess, highlight us and just keep fighting for us in those spaces that we have, that we're not able to reach really well. Or in that sense, I guess, just trying to find some people that are there to listen and to reach out. But I'm not going to lie, it is a struggle. We're going through it every day. And yeah, it's definitely something that we question also every day. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm struck by both of your responses have such respect for elders, and it is something that comes through in racialized communities a lot more. Because my knee-jerk reaction is old people have been young, and therefore the onus is on them to start the bridge building process. So that's my knee jerk. But no, completely love those responses. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention another initiative that Synapcity works with, and that is iGen Ottawa. They are a purpose-built group to connect generations and to facilitate dialogue between youth and seniors. This winter, their main day, iGen Ottawa, their main day is June 1st annually, but this winter and through COVID, they've also been doing an initiative called Good Neighbors Ottawa, which is specifically for facilitating conversations. So helping to alleviate isolation, especially right now and going into a long, cold winter. Please do check them out if you are interested in that intergenerational perspective. So unless we have any other questions that have popped up from anyone, I know that we are right at the end of our time. So I wanted to thank both of you so much for coming out and sharing with us today. I hope that we are able to bring some more eyes to the things you're working on. They're urgent priorities, and I think we should all do what we can to move them forward. And I want to thank everyone here for being a great participant, asking great questions, and participating in a little bit of community middle of COVID December. So
You might have had a question. I saw a hand.
Oh, there's a hand. Okay, please. Sorry, who did you say had the hand up?
I think you're just looking for the unmute button, it looks like.
Oh, it's Judy. Ah, there we go.
There.
There you go.
I just wanted to say thank you to these two young women. I've learned so much from you both. And I commend you for your courage taking on these issues, which we as a country have been ignoring for so long. And I think you will make a difference for this city. And I hope we get a chance to work together at a certain point. So thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Judy. With that, everyone, I hope you have a great night. And if you have any other questions, please let me know. I'll be sending out a wrap up of this event soon, which will include all the links to the initiatives that we're talking about. The two urgent ones I want to put back in your brains as you leave is the sit-in at the University of Ottawa. The Instagram handle is uracism.e. We will post that up. And also the Winter Support Fund that Leading in Color is doing for racialized youth, a mutual aid group. And they've already done 12 recipients. There's 68 requests. That sounds like we need to be doing some more there. So anything you guys can contribute, we appreciate. Boost it to your networks, and have a great night, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks again. Have a great night.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.